So take it away, Sandra. I believe you're starting this off.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, Debbie, both of you for hosting us tonight. This is a real treat. As Marilyn mentioned, my name is Sandra Goldmark. I'm from the Columbia Climate School, but I am also really excited to be on the call with a bunch of folks from Tennessee. My mother-in-law lives in Knoxville, and I spend a lot of time in Tennessee, usually around the dinner table. So it's nice to be in Tennessee in a slightly more work-related um, capacity. So Danielle and Gary and I are going to do a little tag team on this presentation, and I get the fun part of a little bit setting the table. So Marilyn already threw a few terms out, some of which you're probably very familiar with, like recycling, some which maybe you're less familiar with, like extended producer responsibility. All of these terms fall under the umbrella of what is called the circular economy or circularity. Um, you can go to the next slide, Danielle. What is circularity, you might ask, or maybe you already know, but I think it's worth spending a little time on because we're here to talk about one specific and really exciting initiative for Tennessee, the Waste to Jobs Act. But I think it's important to situate it in this broader concept of circular economy or circularity because we've got one powerful piece of policy on the table, but it's associated with a whole suite of really powerful tools that can bring a lot of benefits to communities, to the environment, and to businesses. So I just want to I'm going to give us our little primer, our introduction. Out of curiosity, and it will help me tune. Some of you are on screen and some aren't, but anybody who feels like I'm really already super expert in the circular economy, raise your hand or raise your little Zoom hand if you want to. Nobody so far. Anybody who's like, I've heard of it and like, no, I kind of know what it means, but secretly I'm not really super sure. That's Marilyn. Some others are like, I don't know what language you're speaking. Tell us, lady. Okay. Here's the funny part. You do actually already know what the circular economy is. You definitely do because it is so familiar. So I'll just take us through the steps and you're gonna at the end be like, oh yeah, she didn't need to tell me. This is the linear economy. This is where we live today by and large. This is pretty simple. We take materials from the earth, we extract resources, whether it's materials to make steel or lumber. We produce goods. We manufacture them, we make them, we send them around the world, we distribute them, we use them for a period of time, often a shockingly short period of time, and then we dispose of them. This is sometimes written in shorthand by people who are not fans of the linear system as the take, make, waste model. Um, and it is dependent on the notion that the earth has an infinite carrying capacity, an infinite number of resources that we could just forever take things, make them, use them, and put them in a landfill. I'm sure all of you have experienced this when your cell phone dies or when something is poorly designed and breaks and you say, well, I don't even know what to do with this. I don't think this can really be recycled. I don't even know where to send it to be recycled. Bloop, it goes in the landfill. And it often feels quite terrible because you kind of know those materials are valuable and it could probably be fixed, but there's just in this day and age almost nowhere to get that done anymore. So that's the linear economy. And that carries a cost for all of us, a cost for the environment, and we'll hear more about some of those specific costs. And a cost for those businesses. It has some short-term benefits for businesses, but it has some long-term problems. The circular economy looks like this. This is a very simple graphic, but it's a useful one. And in the circular economy, we are still extracting materials from the earth, right? But we're probably doing less of it. And the materials that we're extracting are renewable, they are sustainably sourced, and we're placing less of a load on that regenerative capacity of the planet. We're designing things a little bit differently in the circular economy. So we're designing them so that they can be fixed or that they can easily be broken apart for recycling. They could easily be reused or maybe designing things that can last longer. We're still distributing items for use and selling them in stores, but then we're creating more opportunities for reuse, for resale, for repair, for refurbishment. So in this graphic, I always think that little bottom green section should be much, much bigger. We actually want to keep materials and items in that bottom section as long as possible and at their highest utility. So if we make a lamp, we want to fix it and keep using it and pass it on to our neighbor when we're done with it and then sell it at the thrift store and then eventually maybe reclaim the parts and materials and make a new lamp. And that's when we start moving into the bottom left part of the circle. In addition to having what we have today, which is linear distribution models, I sell you the lamp, you're done with it, it goes in the landfill in a straight line, we begin to build more systems for collecting things back, for getting things back into a production cycle. Again, traditional recycling is like this. I sell you a soda, you drink the soda. If we have a recycling system, I can get the can back from you and make a new can out of it. And in a circular economy, we want to be doing a lot more of that, collecting and reclaiming a lot more of those materials so that we can feed them back into a new design and production cycle. We still have a little bit of waste, you see it in that little arrow, but less, much, much less. Next slide. That is the circular economy. And this is really, again, I wanted to sort of emphasize, this is really simple and intuitive. It's all around us because it exists right now. Every time you hand some clothes over to, when my sister gives me her sweater when she's done with it, that's a little bit of circularity. When I share a stroller, when my kid grows out of it with the woman down the street and pass it on to her, that's circularity. When we do traditional recycling, like collecting a tin can, that's circularity. When we design something really thoughtfully so that it can last a long time, the way many objects used to be designed, right? That is circularity. So I really like to stress this point. Circularity is not new. In fact, it's very ancient. It's the way most human societies, including our own, worked for a long, long time. I remember my grandmother used to wash the tinfoil, put it in the drawer to use it again. I still do it. Um, it's frugality. It's making sense of valuing the materials and the things that we have. So a lot of people I find intuitively are drawn to it, but we live in a system today where it's just gotten harder and harder to practice these very simple, very basic, common sense practices where it's sometimes cheaper to just toss something than to reclaim it and keep it in use. And the last thing I'll say about circularity before handing off to Gary and Danielle to talk about how this relates to this specific initiative in front of Tennessee voters is the fact that circularity is how nature works, right? This is basic. Every time there is waste from a system in nature, like if I'm done with my banana peel, nature composts it and reclaims those nutrients and it becomes food for another cycle. This is, all of nature reuses waste from any system to make new things. So it's a very, very fundamental, very beautiful, very elegant system. And that's why I'm so passionate about it and why I get really excited when I see concrete policy, business, and community-based initiatives that can make it, again, the default for how we work as humans.
So now Gary and I will sort of take over in a little bit of more of a conversation about circularity and start talking about what it means at different scales because, you know, this works differently in communities across the country and across the world, depending on what you're talking about. But to have a robust circular economy, you need a robust collection, take back, and reuse system. And something that we want to get into today that Gary is leading is the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act, and it's an extended producer responsibility bill, which will help Tennessee get closer to achieving a circular economy. So Gary, do you want to jump in here and talk through what is this slide telling us?
Sure, but before we do that, something that Sandra had pointed out, I thought really was very interesting. And if you don't mind, if you could go back to that circularity slide right there. So for those perhaps who I do not know, thank you very much, first of all, for asking me to participate. I was in a hearing about a year ago, and this gentleman from the waste industry got up and he was presenting to this committee, and he says, I'm from the waste industry, and we don't produce the waste, we just manage it. And I got a chuckle out of it because I am from the organization or from the industry that actually makes the waste. So I've spent 40 plus years in the packaging industry. Actually, it's probably longer. I grew up in New York City, and my dad was in the box business, and I have followed through for 50 years. I'll actually be retiring from my current job in sales in June, thank God. I have no hair left because of that stress in the packaging business. But I wanted to just point this out. Having been in the packaging industry, I know exactly where this waste and the material comes from. I know how it has been exacerbated through single-use plastics over the past 20, 25 years. I'm not going to go down rabbit trails, but really quickly, many of us can't, if we go back 20, 25 years, single-use plastics, we saw it in beverage bottles, but we didn't see it in yogurt containers. Mr. Chobani has become a billionaire really over the last 20, 25 years, right? Single-use containers, convenience, and expand that across the whole consumer products group. Many of the products that you see in supermarkets, we never saw. We used to get our meats and cheese and whatnot behind the deli container. Not anymore. Everything is fresh packed. The materials, and I called on many of those factories where they package the meat up and the cheese up and the snack foods up, and they ship them thousands of miles through the supply chain. And really what their main focus has always been, if the customer wants to go ahead and get a product to Walmart, they don't care about the packaging in terms of its end of life. The packaging's responsibility is to get the product there safely. The supply chains are longer, right? So they've got to make these packaging from plastics that are highly specialized, that will hold these gases in. There are gases in, for instance, a bag of potato chip. It's all nitrogen. It's not air, it's nitrogen. So I'm just saying all this is because packaging is a specialty. And when you go to design the packaging, the first step is the package in the packager's and the brand owner's mind has been through this linear economy to design the package so it gets to the consumer safely. After that, for most part, nobody really cared exactly how it was going to go ahead and be trashed. That was the responsibility of the taxpayer and the municipality. So it goes into the production. Let's say I make film for Lay's potato chips. It goes in, I make a film, goes to Lay's production, to Frito-Lay, goes in distribution. It lasts a year and a half on the shelf life. The consumer consumes it, right? What do? Throw it in the garbage. Here's the bottleneck, and this is what I wanted to go ahead and focus on. Here is where the huge problem that prohibits circularity in this country is collection. Our collection system in this country cannot keep up with the amount of packaging that has been developed over the past 20, 25 years, the single use, the e-commerce, everything. We have absolutely overwhelmed it. I think I'm speaking to my age generation, where I think we all go ahead and remember Lucy and Ethel as they come down that chocolate line, right? Where it starts off nice and slow, and then all of a sudden that line is going and going and going and going. That is exactly what we have here. And the fact that the taxpayer and the municipalities can't handle the amount of packaging, this is where we go ahead and we can now go ahead into the EPR and why I am involved, okay? So we have literally 40 million tons. Okay, just put your heads around this. 40 million tons of packaging waste that gets thrown away into landfills. Okay, everything that you see in green, that is what's currently recycled. So you can see that nationwide, approximately 79% of all packaging, and this is going to vary by state, because some states have what they call bottle bills, and bottle bills have been around for many years. However, a new bottle bill hasn't passed in a state in 20 years. But if you're in a state in New York or Vermont or Tennessee, we don't have bottle bills. And I can tell you, this Tennessee legislature won't pass a bottle bill because the bottling companies are against it. But to this slide, you can see cardboard is definitely the most recycled, but you can look at all the other things that are down there. That is what's going into our landfill. So we can go to the next slide. So here's a state-by-state breakdown of what is actually recycled, of that 40%. So in Tennessee here, we recycle approximately 12%. So 88% of our packaging waste, that bottles, cans, cardboard's a little higher, but this is, again, these are averages. Aluminum, glass, we only recycle 12%. Why? We don't have the infrastructure. Just to go back to my own point, that original point, we don't have the ability to collect it. We don't have the ability to process it. Why? Because the taxpayer dollars are better spent on schools, police, all of the major things that have to be done. And there are municipalities, when they start to run out of money, the first thing to go, recycling. We can go to the next slide.
Gary, if I could just layer on that, we
Sure.
saw that after COVID, right? Where overnight cities and municipalities had to figure out how to reappropriate funds. And so to rightly so, to meet, to keep people healthy and alive. And the biggest thing that suffered was recycling infrastructure, recycling collection. What you should take away from this map is, not red states, green states, blue states, who cares? It's what is the biggest determiner of, what, whether you're in red or green here is not the politics. It's the accessibility to curbside recycling. And there are 9,000 different municipalities across the country with 9,000 different ways recycling is managed. Can you even imagine that? We're talking some, is PET plastic accepted here and it's not accepted somewhere else, and on and on. And so, like Gary was saying, glass isn't recycled everywhere because it's heavy, because it's hard to transport, and because it's not valuable, quote unquote, in our waste system where materials are collected and then sold to be recycled into future things, right? So that's what the discrepancy here, and why certain states have a higher rate than others. They might have more robust infrastructure in that state, and they may have higher populations in that state that can support higher volumes of materials being collected and recycled.
Yeah, if I could just make a point about glass. Glass actually, if you have a landfill, if you're a landfill operator, if you're a waste management or Republic Services, landfills get paid by tonnage. Glass is heavy. So glass, in many cases, many of these waste companies would rather landfill the glass, because when they run that truck up on that scale, glass actually can make it heavier. So it's a kind of almost a deterrent. Many areas don't have actually glass recycling because it is kind of dangerous too as well. It breaks and it can cut. But glass is something that we definitely need within this state of Tennessee, and we can talk about that.
Right.
So yeah, we rank 48th in the nation. So they did a report, and only West Virginia and Louisiana are after Tennessee. We also have, as our Senate sponsor, Senator Campbell says, Senator Heidi Campbell says, we have an anvil hanging over our heads here in Tennessee. Our landfills literally are at almost at capacity. The major landfill here in Tennessee is called Middle Point, and Middle Point is in Murfreesboro, and Murfreesboro has about 2 years left, and they've been trying to expand but we also have another law here in Tennessee that prohibits expansion of landfills without local approval. And the mayor of Murfreesboro and the county mayor have come out against expanding, and there's been court battles. So Middle Point's not going to expand. And our only choice is to go ahead and truck our garbage to Alabama or Mississippi, other areas. So I've already pointed on the fact that we only recycle 12%. Access-wise, only less than 50% of Tennessee residents have access. So there's a lot of material, and we say, and we've changed or adjusted our strategy that, we can take all this waste and we can create jobs. Instead of throwing it away and putting it into landfills, we can go ahead and we have industries that need it and we can create jobs. So that's why we called it the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act.
That's great. And, there are frameworks for this, right? Tennessee is not going to be far from the first state to do it. The United States is far from the first country to be leveraging this type of policy. And, I'll just say, in this new world where cost of goods is increasing because of tariffs and packaging margins are so low, the more that we can help support the reuse system or the recycling system through these type of EPR laws or collection, policies, the better off we'll be overall. And so it's a real moment, I think, for us in our country to sort of lean into this and be able to make progress on something that should be really apolitical. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, you can, that's just an example of how bad things are here in Tennessee, but you can go into the next slide. So again, it's just a repeat that we throw away almost 900,000 tons to 1 million tons of packaging. We can take a look at that glass containers, 173,000 tons of glass. And we only recycle about 16,000 tons of glass here. And we have the tile industry here in the state of Tennessee who has told us that they could take every single bit of those glass containers and still need more instead of using sand. We have aluminum companies that are been very much behind our bill, that are importing 2/3 of their aluminum come in from Canada. We all know what's going on in terms of tariffs on Canada. And they, in fact, could use all of the aluminum that we throw away. We have a plastics manufacturer or plastics recycler, one of the largest, actually the largest plastics recycler down in Troy, Alabama, 260 miles south of Nashville, that could take all of our plastics if we could just collect it.
I think also when you look at this slide, I like to tell my students that I love garbage. And it sort of gets a chuckle, but I love garbage because when I see mountains of garbage, I see real opportunity to reuse those materials, to turn that into something that's valuable for another industry. I mean, here there's millions and millions of dollars that are literally going into our landfills that if we could capture would benefit Tennessee residents and the Tennessee economy, just because we're lacking the infrastructure today to do so. And so, this is the data to back it up, and what could be done also. Also with this, all of these materials would need, like Gary was saying, need people in good paying jobs to be able to manage and sort these materials. So there's a real opportunity here in Tennessee.
You bring up an excellent point as well. I think I've been doing this now for about 2.5 years as a volunteer. And I think to myself, because we have opposition, we have folks, we have businesses who will be paying and will explain exactly how EPR works. But we've had opposition. And I've thought to myself, who do I represent? And really, when it comes down to it, I represent the Tennessee taxpayers. And the reason being, and I can say that, is because what we're trying to do The Tennessee taxpayers currently foot the bill to throw away all this material. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. Actually, we've probably estimated here in Tennessee, we throw away, it probably costs us about $125 million to throw away all of this garbage. Tennessee taxpayers are paying $100 to $125 million. And with this legislation that we are proposing, that there would be no cost to the Tennessee taxpayers. In fact, that money could then be used for other services that the municipalities would need. We wouldn't need to pay for throwing away all this material.
Gary, we have a question of clarification, which I did say I'd interrupt for. We're being asked, what is aseptic and gable top and PP on your slide here?
So aseptic is, you will see it in milk containers, aseptic containers. No, those are gable top, I'm sorry. Aseptic is
They're the soup boxes or, you know,
Tetra Pak.
the Tetra Pak that are they're, you know, the boxes of soup or chicken stock or what have you. That's aseptic packaging.
And that's not easily recyclable as well, because it has it has foil in the liner.
And I saw about PP as well. PP
And polypropylene by far is the one material that we do not, for the most part, collect here. And that is what the folks down in Troy, Alabama, who I mentioned, KW Plastics, need the most. Because if you go to buy paint in Home Depot, you will notice Behr, B-E-H-R, Behr paint cans are made out of plastic. Those paint cans are made out of polypropylene. And that is what—
And I'll tell you, when I used to work at L'Oreal, and when I worked at L'Oreal, we had polypropylene packaging, and we wanted to start using, you know, integrating recycled content into those packaging, but there's no volume.
Nope.
We couldn't buy it anywhere.
No,
And
in
so,
fact, the folks that are having to buy it, that are having to fill recycled content mandates, are buying a lot of this material overseas.
right.
Which is
And
crazy.
shipping it
I mean,
here.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
we're basically taking their recycled garbage and bringing it in here, as opposed to, because we don't have the infrastructure. So,
You know, if I was a resident of Tennessee, I'd prefer that $120 million a year be going to education instead of managing waste, but
so let's say, what do we need to go ahead and, to fix this problem? So we have estimated, and we've done it because there's been studies out there, and in order to go ahead and fix the U.S. recycling infrastructure, it is estimated $20 billion to bring the U.S. infrastructure up to speed to handle all of the packaging, that is the 40 million tons that we spoke about before. So by population, we figure that in order to go ahead and fix Tennessee's, we would need about a $400 million investment. Now, I don't know many Tennesseans who are going to go ahead and start raising their hands saying, yeah, we'll throw in a few extra dollars on our taxpayers. It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. So funding, and this is the word that they hear me up in the state legislature talk all the time, funding. Where are you going to get the funding? Everybody comes up with great ideas. We can do this, we can educate. And my question always is, where's your funding? Okay. And this is one of the things that TDEC, Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation, when they write their annual reports, they say our funding mechanisms. We do not have the funding. When Nashville writes their reports as to why they cannot expand recycling, or other cities around, why can't you expand recycling? Funding. So this EPR is bringing a funding mechanism. So we can go to the next slide. So what is it? What is EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility? Well, literally, it shifts the cost of recycling from the taxpayers to the brands. Those folks who I showed very earlier, the Frito-Lays, the Mars, the Unilevers, any company that ships brands. If you go to your supermarket and you take a look up and down those aisles, those are brands, those are the producers, those are the folks, anything that will end up on a curbside. This is not business to business. This is strictly curbside that ends up in a household. Materials that end up in Home Depot, if we bring it home, that is a material that these producers would be responsible to share in the cost of recycling. So now, instead of just that linear economy where their responsibility was to bring the product freshly to us, EPR extends their responsibility to now end of life of their materials so that we can now fund a circular economy. So we say, why would brands support EPR? And it was just touched on very briefly. There are many brands, and Mars and Unilever, Nestle, Danone, these folks have recycling content mandates, which basically they have made goals. They have stated goals and stated mandates that says we need to go ahead and have a minimum, and even Coca-Cola, we need to have minimum content of recycled content in our packaging and by 2025. Many of these companies, including Coca-Cola, have backpedaled on it because they can't get it. They can't get the materials. So there is a need for the materials in order to go ahead and make the minimum content.
Yeah, and on that note, it's like, how do we think about getting more materials into the system? There are these EPR laws all over the world, but this is just a snapshot of EPR laws across the United States. There are EPR laws for different types of materials in all of these states, with California and Vermont having close, and Maine having the most of them. But there are some really high value materials, across all of these gray states that we could be capturing to improve the system if we do it in the right way. And so the laws as they exist, or EPR laws as they're functioning today, we know this works. It's not a risky proposition. It's not a surprise to business. This is, the cost of doing business in certain states, right? And companies are complying with all kinds of other laws. And so, there is a cost for managing through the material. We call this, when it's not managed, we call it a negative externality, right? For those of you that might be familiar with the economics terms, because it's a negative externality because it's ending up somewhere and someone else has to pay for managing it, right? And if we bring it into the system and it gets to be managed by the entities that are responsible for it, it's more efficient for everyone. Gary, this is the picture of Target that you wanted to just demonstrate sort of, I guess, how many of these packages we're paying as taxpayers to manage in landfills, and the opportunity here, right, to engage these companies to manage through.
This just will help everybody get a visual of what are we talking about. We're talking about basically everything that when you walk into a Target store or Costco or Publix or Kroger, these are the types of things that these brands will now be paying. And to Danielle's point, in our countries around the world, as we will soon see on the slide, and in 7 states they've passed EPR laws. These brands will be paying to have their packaging recycled. So this is a list of the companies that have formed what we call a producer responsibility organization. These are the founding members. So these folks got together and in order to manage the program, so any company, let's take Oregon passed EPR legislation about 3 years ago and will be the first state that will start to charge fees on the packaging. Now you'll say, well, how are the fees based? Well, the fees are based upon the size, the weight, and the material. And if the material is more recyclable, let's say it's paper as opposed to plastic, they will pay a lesser fee on paper than they will on plastic. So these folks will be paying into a fund, and basically they will be managing this fund. A plan has been created along with the state of Oregon to manage the recycling and who's going to get recycling, how much the recycling rates are going to be, and they have come up with a plan along with this producer responsibility organization.
So the money just goes into a more robust infrastructure within the state of Oregon, improving the machinery at material recovery facilities or recycling centers, improving, residential education programs, improving curbside recycling programs, because I'm not sure how many of you have curbside recycling. But I don't, it's my understanding that that's not something that's pervasive in Tennessee. And so, that would go, all this money would go to help recycling access programs. So it's really critical funding. And Sandra, you have been seeing circular economy in action for many, many years. You started your career in the theater industry as a set designer. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this case study and sort of why this works from practicing it?
Sure, thank you. And thank you both of you. It's so interesting. Even I'm very familiar with this stuff, and I love to see all the details and watch how it's playing out. And I see Robin has a question. So I'm going to tell one little story. Yes, Robin, basically the state charges the companies, they're members of the PRO, they put money into this fund, and the state uses that money to build collection infrastructure. It's a way for those businesses to not just be spending their money to get the product to us, but to also be responsible for getting those materials back into
I just want to clarify, it's not the state that is charging. The producers are actually charging themselves.
Good, thank you. Yeah. So my one little story here to sort of zoom back out is from a completely different field. But as Danielle said, I used to be a theatrical set designer. I worked in theater for many years. And we started really expanding our reuse, our recycling. Again, theater, just like the rest of the world, is a place where we've always recycled and reused things. We never have any money in theater, and you've got a valuable material, you use it again. You use that costume over and over. You use that scenery over and over. So circularity and recycling is part of our DNA. But as with much of the modern world we live in, sometimes it gets overtaken and we start doing things the linear way. And throwing things out instead of reusing them. So in my theater department at Barnard, we started really leaning into reuse, trying to quantify the environmental benefits of that reuse. And we designed a set. In the middle is the thing as built, with about 50% new material and 50% used. Then we did an analysis of what would the benefits be if we had completely made that set and props and costumes out of reused materials or completely out of new. And you can see on the bottom is what that set, props and costumes would have cost in emissions versus the top if it had been made of all used materials. And it's the emissions from, it would have more than doubles the emissions if you make it all new and less than half if you do it all used. So this was just a little theater example of something that we know from industry after industry and sector after sector, material after material, reuse and recycling is a very simple and effective way to make an environmental difference. And that's where we started. We tried to make a difference, less waste, save the planet, woohoo. And here's what was interesting. You'll notice that this bill that Gary is talking about is called the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act. And you might think, well, oh, okay, it's called that because recycling's not sexy and people don't want to hear about recycling or whatever. No, it's actually true. When you start leaning into circularity and really getting intentional about reclaiming the value of the materials, you can really, really start to make people's lives better. And this was one of the most eye-opening moments for me in all of my journey of learning about circularity, and I learned it in the theater. We started leaning into reuse because we were sick of sending things to landfill and we wanted to reduce waste. And we wound up shifting our money to the young people that we hire, young artists. We had always had trouble paying our artists well enough. This is a problem endemic to theater. And we found that by spending less on new materials and by being less wasteful, we quite literally were able to create more jobs and better paying jobs in our tiny little theater ecosystem. And it wasn't even our goal to begin with. And I just share this story because for me, it was such a tangible, real life example of this notion that we're not just recycling to reduce waste and we're not just recycling to save the materials in the tin can. We are. Landfills are full and those materials are valuable. But the notion of waste to jobs is real. I have seen it in my life. I have seen the benefit of being able to say to a prop artisan that I'm hiring, I can pay you 75% more than I was able to pay you on the last show you worked on. And that is a huge, huge thing. And I don't know if any of you have seen this, Gary sent when we were prepping for this call, a really fantastic video they've put together on the Waste to Jobs Act. And it shows at least 3 specific real companies in Tennessee and Alabama, I believe, that need these materials. And if they have them, can use them to create jobs. And I loved that video because, again, it got so specific and put faces and real jobs to this abstract concept of like recycling and EPR and circular economy. And it's showing us real businesses that say, if I can get this glass, I can use it to make these porcelain tiles and I can hire people to do it. And I just loved that large scale version of what I encountered in the theater. So this is our end. We're going to pause here and open for questions and discussion. And I just wanted to end with this notion that for me, circularity is really all about values. What do we value? When we take a material, tin, aluminum, metal, glass from the earth and use it, do we really value that material and can we keep it in use for as long as possible? And do we value the human labor that makes these objects that we use? And can we find ways to spend money on those people and less money on the stuff that we're making? So, and I'm curious what you all think, and I want to hear what your thoughts and questions are.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. We do have a question that was sent to me privately. So here it goes. The Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act approach, has it been uniquely designed to be more successful than other state EPR programs? And I think that's a question for you, Gary. What would you say was unique about the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act versus other?
That is a very good question. Now, in Tennessee, as those of you who are in Tennessee know, that Tennessee has a supermajority of Republicans. The other states that have passed EPR are all Democrat. So the way that the bill was, or the EPR legislation was introduced and has been introduced is mostly in Democratic states where you have environmental advocates and legislators who are driving the efforts. This has been totally different. We do not look at necessarily, I want to be careful with my words, but the legislature does not look at environmentalism the same way that a New York, a California, Oregon does. So we have had to take a business approach. And that is what we've focused on. We have focused on reaching out to businesses. And as Sandra touched on, we found businesses that will benefit. And you will see on our video the businesses that will benefit. The aluminum industry is a major industry. It's a $9 billion industry. It represents It employs tens of thousands of people. We have a huge ceramic tile industry business here that needs the glass. So what we did was focus on business, how this will help businesses with using the materials, especially now with the tariffs, where these companies have to pay more to bring in materials that we're throwing away. So, and we've also made it permissive, because I was sitting in a representative's office several months ago, and I explained this all to him, and he says, "Well, if this bill comes to the floor, I'm going to have to vote against it." And we thought he would be an advocate for it because he had done some environmental work, and we thought that he would be a proponent. He said I'd have to vote against it, and I was really a little shocked. And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because I'm from a rural county." And he says, if we want to tell people to recycle, they're going to come back and say, we don't want to recycle. We don't want to be told what to do. I mean, I'm literally, this is exactly what he's telling me. We don't want to be told what to do. And it's the big counties that are responsible mostly for this problem. So I took that back to Senator Campbell and our team, and we thought, okay, this will minimize some of our objections. And we we made it permissive that counties, there is 95 counties in the state of Tennessee. 8 counties have over 200,000 people. We made this Tennessee Waste to Jobs applicable to those 8 counties, with Davidson and Knox and all of the other major counties. And if the smaller counties want to opt in, they can opt in. So that will be put the responsibility back to the local control. That, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about what's going on with EPR, we are the first state to have done that because of the environment and the population and the political situation that we have.
A couple of a quick thing. The video link is actually in the chat, and I believe, Debbie, we've sent it out before, and you can also find it on the website of the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act, which is a great website. I encourage you to go there. How will collection be improved? I don't know who wants to answer that one, but probably Gary, but anyone can.
Yeah,
answer.
it would bring collection to, and I just want to skip down to Robin's question. Can towns like Oak Ridge opt in? It's going to be based on the county. If the county wants to opt in, then yes, they could opt in once the legislation is passed. Now, let's say Oak Ridge opts in, and there would be recycling access for all of those counties, for all of those residents. This would bring recycling to all of Tennessee residents who opt in to the program.
Appreciate your comment, Mariana. Is there a way to frame anything, sort of a question out of that?
Can I unmute or should I type?
Yes, you unmuted, fine. Yes, please, anyone has a question, Phil, once we name you, please unmute.
My main question is, because I live in Murfreesboro, and of course we're big on this landfill down the street that is such a disaster with smell and overuse and all that. But I've been composting, recycling, curbside for years and years and years. I'm very much an environmentalist. And there have been 2 curbside businesses, independent businesses in Murfreesboro since I've been in this one house that we've used. One of the businesses could not make it, and they folded, and now we have a new one that's out here. So what would happen to those of us who are using these independent businesses in this opt-in, opt-out scenario?
Sure. So part of the plan, and again, we couldn't get that deep into the weeds on this whole thing, but one of the things that will happen is they created what they call a needs assessment. So they go around the state, all of those counties who have opt-in, and they determine what is needed to bring recycling to all of the residents, and they will come up with the plan. And those that, the existing infrastructure, those companies that currently go ahead and serve you would be negotiated with the pro. And contracts and all of that, those contract negotiations all happen with the pro, because basically the pro is collecting the money from themselves. They're the ones who are financing it. They are the ones that will negotiate with those particular companies.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question.
Robin's asking for clarification. Oak Ridge is in 2 counties. Can Oak Ridge opt in even if the counties don't?
I think we left it to the counties, because the county mayors, you would just have to get after your county mayors.
Blunt County has a good recycling program, for instance. Okay. Are there other questions?
By the way, we've already gotten, Senator Campbell has been very, she's put this message out. We've gotten already commitment from many rural counties that they want to opt in.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask Sandra and Danielle if there are winning examples, successful examples in other places, and what do you think is due to their success? Or conversely, what challenges are they facing? Without spending another hour on it, if there's a couple of highlights that you wanted to go. And I see you, Robin, I see your hand is raised. I'll get to you in just a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there are new EPR laws all over the place, and I think that probably Gary could speak to sort of really what's working on the EPR level and what's not. More on the behavior change level, I think is where Sandra and I can be helpful to identify sort of like what are the best strategies that or different ways to get people to start thinking about their own waste and their buying power and things like that. I think Sandra has a really good reading about looking in the rear view mirror for, Sandra, what I'm talking about, look in the rear view for solutions. And, what we're talking about is almost thinking about packaging as well. It is. Every piece of packaging we've ever created is still on this planet, right? Plastic is not something that biodegrades. And so thinking about it more in terms of like the milkman days, where you'd open up your door, you'd get your milk in the morning, you'd use the bottles, you'd put it out. It is when Sandra says these examples exist in our life or in our memory, in all different places. I mean, that's the one that I always go back to as a model that was widespread, touched everyone, was just the way we did things, right? And not until plastic came along did we end up moving away from that model. And so and I'd argue to our detriment. So thinking about our long history and what's worked and what can we revive, what can we improve. It's not all a technology solution at the end of the day. There's some behavioral changes as well, but in order to change the behavior, we have to bring back the systems that encouraged those behaviors, and the businesses that encouraged those behaviors. And this is one example of I think how we can start that.
Thank you, Danielle. Robin, you had a question? Do you still have a question?
I still do. I'm not really clear on how the sort of money flows in this situation. I had asked, so the state charges the company, and I was told that's not the case. But how does the money flow such that you actually have more recycling infrastructure? That still isn't clear to me in this. So could you just, I'm Fritos and I charge you 30 cents for this package right now. How would the price would change?
No.
Okay.
No, it wouldn't. Yeah.
Here's an example.
Okay.
Lay's
Thank
potato
you.
chips.
All right.
Millions of Lay's potato chips are sold into, let's say, the state of Tennessee.
Mhm.
Lay's, because it's plastic and because of the size of the package, may pay 2 cents a package, and they will pay it into the producer responsibility. Think about all of the packages that come into the state of Tennessee. You will then create revenues of somewhere between $250 to $300 million a year for all the packaging based upon the size, the weight, and the material coming in. So these companies are actually funding the recycling infrastructure, and they are in fact have the organization that is managing and working to go ahead and improve the recycling.
I can speak a little bit to that from the company perspective. So at the end of the year, the companies that are part of the PRO, have to report on what they sold in the state. And based on the predetermined calculations by material, weight, and size, they will know what is the size of the check that they have to write to the PRO as this independent entity that they've basically co-founded as a group of companies. And then the PRO works with the state or with municipalities and local entities to determine where the biggest need is in terms of improving the infrastructure, and will make those investments based on grants or based on direct investments, based on sort of what the determination is. So it's a transparent organization. They have to file reporting every year. They have there's you can track the money, let's say.
And it's a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit, exactly. And it's separate. It's a separate entity from these companies.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically what this legislation does is it sets up that PRO.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What does the PRO stand for? Or is it just
It stands for Producer Responsibility Organization.
Okay. All right. So it's a separate organization
Yeah,
that,
it's the heart of EPR.
yeah. Okay. That's what I wasn't getting. And then cities like Oak Ridge could then apply to PRO and say, hey, we need, like, for instance, we don't recycle our glass, and people would like to do that. And there's different options for doing that. And I'm sure there's people who'd like our glass. So we could apply for a grant for that to improve that recycling.
Well, actually, the county would just have to opt in and you would be covered and you would get the services.
For recycling glass?
Yes, all of it, with glass, plastics, paper, all of the key materials.
It seems too good to be true, doesn't it, Robin?
Yeah, I was just I'm trying to sort of figure out the mechanics of it. So somebody, say our county opted in for it, that would mean all of a sudden we had someone would come to our city and say, okay, here's where your glass can go. Here's where this can go. We will work with Waste Connections to set them up to bring us glass, or et cetera.
Yep. That's how it works. Like I said,
It does take time, though. I mean, I think that's
yeah, the
course.
average time, this is a 3-year, this is a 3-year process. I mean, think about it. You're setting up
Right.
an organization
Yeah.
that's going to handle hundreds of millions of dollars and millions of residents. This takes at least 3 years to set up. Now, the opposition comes from, and I'll tell you who opposed us here in Tennessee. There's a few of companies, but Jack Daniels came out against us. And here's Jack Daniels that needs the glass, but they're going to be paying. They pay in Canada, they pay in all those other states, they pay overseas into EPR funds, but for some reason they're opposing our bill, and yet we're the most business-friendly EPR bill that there is. We've had the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce come out against us because Coca-Cola, the bottlers, it's not Coca-Cola brand, but it was the bottlers here in Tennessee that have said, we already pay enough and we don't want to pay anymore. So they came against us. But listen, it's just an education. We're working through it. We're not giving up. We have a lot of companies that support us, and it's going to take some time and a lot of constituent support.
Right. I'm just trying to be able to I'm just trying to understand so that I can help develop that constituent support. And I'd
Mm.
watched the movie and had not been able to figure out how the money flows. And I'm a systems person, so that's what I needed to.
I'm gonna put my email address in if anybody has any questions. Is that okay, Marilyn?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for doing that.
Please,
I'm
I'm happy to talk EPR to anybody any day of the week.
We are technically at the end, but I think Debbie, you had a question that was good to raise about quantities. I think we should ask that one. And you're still on mute, Debbie.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to imagine the logistics on it for places that have curbside recycling now that already have some sorting capacity. How do they scale it up to include so many different varieties of recyclables? Does the technology already exist to do that many recycling separations?
Yes, and this would also answer Christina's question. If you watch our video, at the very end of the video, you will see a Rumpke facility up in Columbus, Ohio. That is the type of facility that we want to bring here to Tennessee. It was a $100 million facility. It is the state-of-the-art facility that it's actually the largest recycling system in North America. And if you watch to the end of that video, you will see how it cleans, how it separates, how it creates 15 different types of commodities, and it reduces the contamination down to almost 98% clean.
I want to encourage everyone on this call to share the website that Gary put in here for the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act. There's really lots of excellent material, and this video, a lot of us have already seen. If you haven't seen it, you'll be inspired. But also to encourage your friends and family to learn about this. The legislation is ongoing. It's going to come back in the next session. We are just ending this very exciting session that has just been passed. So continue to support Gary and his team, and also just to support behavioral change that Daniel and Sandra are talking about. I think one of the things that EPR does, it breathes new life. For those of us who do recycling and feel like I do it, but is it enough? It really makes you feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I think it's very encouraging. I want to thank our speakers for this very exciting and interesting presentation. And please do take Gary up on his offer to write him with more questions.
Marilyn, one last thing, which
Yes.
is that the recording will be shared on our website. And we'd be happy for you all to, as Marilyn said, to share it with many others. This has really been very interesting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Paused. Thank you. And good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we'll
Thanks,
be
guys.
back next month on May 7th, a webinar on the judiciary. So that should
Thank
be
you
it.
all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.